friends, and welcome back to the Rewind podcast of Forward Church. Join us each week as we take a look back on Sunday's message and dig a little deeper into the conversations with those who are teaching across our sites at Forward. We want to invite you to be part of the conversation too. So if something we're talking about on Sunday morning sparks a question in you, head to our website, forwardchurch.ca/ask us, and submit your questions there. And we're going to do our best to engage with those questions in this space. With that said, let's jump in and get started.
Welcome everyone to another edition of the Rewind podcast. So great to join you. I am here today with Pastor Daryl and Pastor Derek. Pastor Daryl, of course, was in Kitchener this past Sunday. Pastor Derek, you were, I don't want to say at our Paris site, because as a guy who lives
Paris
in Paris,
location.
At our Paris location.
Brant County. I was at Fort Brant.
That's why we call it a Brant site.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to call it a Paris site.
Yeah.
It was a thing.
It
was a thing.
It was a thing as soon as we started to say it. Now you told me that there is actually a distinction in Paris. I don't know if you want to reveal these secrets because there might be new people to Paris.
I'm not going to do that. No.
But let's just say that
town's the nice side. No.
Some people are called parasites and some people are called something else.
That's true. And we will leave it at that. Well, we had a great Sunday. I know in Cambridge, we had a number of people baptized this past Sunday, and it was just such an awesome time. And I know that this series has been a real encouragement and blessing for so many people in all of our church locations, and just seeing God at work in some great ways. And this past week, we talked about the idea of rest and grind, and what does Jesus have to say to us. I was thinking this week, what is the most caffeine you've ever had to crush in a day?
I got an answer for this one. So I drank a 6-pack of Coke and ate 5 jumbo-sized Cinnabons.
Wow.
Once in a about 2-hour stretch. This is when I was a Bible college student.
Wow. You got a paper due or something, right?
No, I just I did it on a whim. It wasn't even a dare.
Hey, Madden was out. He got to play. Okay?
I was like, man, I love Coke and I love Cinnabons. I bet you I could do this.
That's awesome, man.
Oh, wow.
Then, but you didn't drink coffee for the longest time, so you went on a mission trip.
Yeah, I went on a mission trip, and then when you're in Lebanon, everybody pours you a glass of coffee when you come in, and a glass of coffee is, sorry to my to those who are Lebanese listeners, I think that might be overselling what it actually is. It's a small cup filled with sludge. And you have to drink it because it would be very dishonoring to your host if you didn't drink it. Right. And sometimes we would do like 3 or 4 different house visits right in a row. I've never had coffee. Now, the good thing with that is that we were all also just totally exhausted. So it gave you enough in your veins to keep going for another visit.
Sure, yeah, makes sense. How about you, Daryl? How much caffeine is can you top that?
Well, probably not, no. I mean, I typically would drink 2 or 3 cups in a day, and that's about it. Like that's it. Although the very first time I had coffee was in college. I was actually trying to get a paper done. Yeah. And my apartment was just really loud, really distracting. And a friend who was in an apartment downstairs, he was away. So I just asked him, like, hey, can I just use your room? I'm just going to write my paper. Got to get done. He's like, yeah, go for it. So I went down there, started writing it. It was going midnight, 1, 2, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And one of the other guys in the room, he just knocks on the door, sees me still working. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning. And he's like, Daryl, I made you some coffee. and he gave it to me. I've never had coffee before, and it was the best coffee I've ever had. Now it turns out he brewed it in the morning.
Oh, wow.
He microwaved it for me. So he didn't even make me like a fresh pot of coffee. No. But he just saw this poor college student working away. He's like, here you go. May you be blessed. And it was amazing. Got the paper done and went to sleep. So there you go.
Can I ask the grade? What was the grade on the paper?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea. Truth be told, I don't even know if I got it done. I don't remember anything beyond that point. It's just that it was at least 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning doing an all-nighter, and he showed great mercy to me. And since then, I've been addicted to coffee. So thanks, Brad. Thanks for doing that.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks for making a brother stumble, Brad.
Nicest guy on earth. A nicest guy. Thanks.
So,
Kirk, I was going to say, you're not a coffee guy.
Derek and I used to be like, both of us were not coffee drinkers.
Both of us, yeah.
I was like greatly disappointed when Derek came back from the missions trip and had coffee.
Yeah.
That, like, I remember you drinking it the first time. I was like, what is going on?
Yeah.
It was just, because now I'm like, I feel like I'm the Lone Ranger.
I still would say I have not grown to love coffee. So occasionally I will have a glass now, but I don't.
You're more about the Red Bull.
Yeah, or Celsius or Zoa, some type of energy drink.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh man, I can't stand any of those. I've tried. They all just taste like garbage to me.
So about, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago now, when we were in Time Change Sunday during the spring, I was preaching on Time Change Sunday. So spring forward, right? And I woke up that morning and I was exhausted. Right. It hit me. So I came into the church and I was so tired, and I said to someone, get me half a cup of coffee. Just get me half. I need a jolt to get me going. Yeah. They got me half a cup of coffee from the cafe here at the church, and I sat in my office and I drank this half a cup of coffee, and it was okay. Then I get into the service and we start worshiping during the service. And all of a sudden, my heart is beating.
Palpitations.
I'm breaking out into this cold sweat, and I'm going, what is going on right now? And I'm praying as we're like, I don't know if I'm going to go on stage. Am I going to pass out before I preach this sermon? And it was the wildest thing. So I've never touched coffee since.
But you don't drink any energy drinks.
I don't drink any energy drinks.
But you've had soft drinks. Like you drink
very rarely.
Oh, so you just really have very your body would have very low.
Yeah, my body my body went, what
tolerance,
in the world did you just do?
Okay. There have been years of my life where I basically run off of Coke all the time. So going to coffee it doesn't really do much.
Yeah. When you think about, actually I read a story about a guy who would drink 47 cups of coffee a day.
What?
Yeah, and in drinking those 47 cups of coffee a day, somebody did some research just to see how productive. He was wildly productive.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I heard you mention that on Sunday, and I have a friend who, when he was working in a mine, and he said it's pretty typical to drink 2 pots of coffee before his shift.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he got in a full day.
Hey, but you go into the mine.
Yeah.
You have 2 pots of coffee.
2 pots. Yeah.
Where do you expel the 2 pots of coffee when you're in the mine?
Well, he was in the machine.
Where else are you going to expel it?
You're now down in the mine. I assume there's no washroom in the mine.
Well, he was working in the not in the mine, but he was all the heavy machinery.
I'm just imagining you just don't want to do that.
He was in the shop, so I'm sure there's a bathroom nearby.
I'm sure you would hope.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So in those moments when you're exhausted.
Yeah.
Forget about the coffee and the caffeine, right?
That's right.
In those moments when you're exhausted, what are some of the things that you notice about yourself? What do you like? What are you like when you're tired?
I have less patience. That's one thing I know about me. My tolerance level, my patience level, things that would just roll off of my back most of the time, all of a sudden start to become things that I just can't let go of, and they're big deals, and I just am irritable, and start to take it out on other people around me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'm probably the same.
Should we ask Steph? Phone a
I
friend.
mean, I get more irritable like when I'm hungry. Like that's like it's less about the being tired part.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that, so, because we're going to be talking about being tired here, I do think that I like to differentiate between just physical tiredness and like, the scripture we're in says weary, right? And I think I'm thinking more about when I'm weary, when I feel a soul spirit exhaustion.
Yeah, when it's deeper than a good nap.
When I'm tired, it's
right?
It's a little bit different than when I am weary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think that I get if you take the fruit of the spirit. Many of them, I'm the opposite when I'm in that space. Yeah. When I feel that kind of soul weariness, exhaustion, or just being physically tired and needing a good nap or a good night's sleep is a different thing. But when it's kind of gets down into the depths of who you are and it's just wearing you down, I would say you take the fruit of the spirit, and for the most part, I'm the opposite in those moments. Don't have a lot of peace, tend to be a little bit more worried. Don't have a lot of joy, tend to be a little bit more cranky.
Does it affect your self-control?
Yeah, it can.
Yeah.
Sure it can.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I think so too for me. Like I'm just walking through in my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's actually become one of the things that is a bit of a barometer that I look at to go, why don't I have any peace right now? Like, what's going on deeper on the inside? Is there an exhaustion on the inside that's manifesting itself in this way?
I remember a global leadership summit talk, and I can't remember who was doing the talk, but they talked about a plane having various gauges, right? And we tend to think of ourselves as having very separate gauges. I've got my emotional gauge, my physical gauge, and my spiritual gauge. And the ultimate point of the talk was, when one gauge gets off, it will set off the other gauges, right? So there is a link. If we're physically tired, we don't take care of it. But there's also like, hey, if you're spiritually tired, you'll start to feel physically tired. If you're emotionally worn out, it can affect your spiritual, right? There is an interconnection as they come together.
Yeah, there is. What about when you're well rested? What are some of the signs that you know that, hey, I'm actually in a pretty good place?
Yeah, I think it ends up being, I think your description there of the fruits of the Spirit is a really helpful way in thinking about that. Because again, it's the same thing of when well rested, emotionally, spiritually, physically, all those things, when there is real rest there, then you do have more peace and more self-control, and all those areas seem to be going far better when that's working.
Yeah. Derek, you talked a second ago about rest, the difference between being physically tired versus a soul weariness. Let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what's the difference in this passage we're in Matthew 11? Jesus talks about finding rest for your soul. What's the difference between rest and rest for your soul?
Yeah, I think we've been talking a lot about identity and security, and I think this ties into this reality. I talked about the fact that the type of rest Jesus gives us is not merely just a physical rest. There's something much deeper in knowing who we are, knowing that Christ loves us, knowing that our eternal destiny is secure, knowing that we're not alone or in this alone, that might not address exactly what we're in the moment and make it go away, but gives us a stamina to be able to handle what is coming at us. I think when you're soul weary, doesn't matter how many vacations you take. doesn't matter if you get yourself a good hobby. It doesn't matter, like all these things just provide a temporary reprieve, and then all of a sudden you're right back to where you were, right?
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Daryl?
Yeah, I was thinking about how maybe answer just a little bit different. There are times when I can feel completely drained from what I've been doing, but my soul feels at rest. So there could be a Sunday where I'm just running from preaching preaching in the morning to meeting up with some people in the afternoon, and then teaching a course at night, and I get home and I'm like, I am exhausted, but my soul feels at rest. A big part of that's when all of those things are areas in which feeling God has given me a calling and gifting in those areas and utilizing it, and seeing God at work in people's lives, so I can walk away from it and be like, oh, this has been so much, but my soul's at rest. And there's other times where I should feel physically rested on vacation in a nice setting and just like laying back, but my soul doesn't feel at rest.
Right.
And part of that is, I'm on vacation, but there's stuff I want to be accomplishing. I want to be out doing things, and there's this wrestling going on inside of me where I haven't been able to fully separate myself from those tasks and actually enjoy the rest that's happening there. And so that's what I think of when I think of like rest and soul rest. Is I think sometimes we're chasing this thing, and we think that soul rest only really comes from saying no to things.
Right.
But sometimes deep soul rest actually comes from walking in obedience of what God's calling you to. So if you're trying to say no, if God's calling you to lead a discipleship group and you're saying no to it, you might feel not as restful. You're like, man, I have my Monday night free. Like, why am I not feeling the rest that I feel like should be accompanying this? And so I think that's something to consider when we think about the type of rest that God's calling us to.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction to make, because I think one of the things that we see quite often is we see the reality that, at least in our culture, there's a lot of conversation about rest. And certainly in the church culture, there's a lot of conversation about rest. But I find that it doesn't usually get into talking about rest for your soul. It's the kind of Sabbath conversation.
Yeah, just saying no to things.
Just saying no to things.
Yeah.
Right, and one of the conversations that I've had with Britt and Nate when we talk about different things in discipleship is there's this danger of extremes that can happen in these conversations. So we've got this one extreme where people are workaholics, and that ends up them not being at rest in their soul because they're just workaholics. And we've got this other extreme that is just we become lazy and we don't work. And I think what you're describing, Daryl, is this reality that being productive with your life and being at rest in your soul can coexist.
They can, yeah. Not always. Like there is this endless striving, trying to always accomplish something.
Right.
And that's why I find speaking on rest is challenging. I'm thankful that next week we're gonna, if I got it right, next week we're gonna.
You got it right.
So it's already made one scheduling error today. Next week we're gonna be talking about work. We're gonna be talking about what's the titles for?
Contribution versus consumption.
Contribution, yeah. And I think that's really helpful. Like, for our listeners, like if you listen to this Sunday, you want to be there for next week because they're going to work in balancing each other out. And I think it's helpful for us to first, probably if I have to say, like, which one do we have to address first? Probably rest. I think that there's probably greater misunderstanding there, although probably a lot of misunderstanding around the idea of contribution as well.
So yeah, I actually started the message in Brant talking about that reality. We're kind of into a 2-week mini series here. Because there is this tension, and it's rooted right in Genesis 1 and 2, right? It's rooted in the fact that we are made in the image of a God who works and then rests. And then we see then man working out of his rest, because man's first full day is the day of rest, and then we work, but we do work before the fall. So Genesis 2:15 says that God gave man work to do in the garden, right? And yes, we have to have both of those things to find the deep satisfaction that we're looking for. That's absolutely true. It's how we're made and wired.
Yeah, and God called both of those things very good. Right? And I think that's such an important message, because I find there's different personalities. We're all wired different ways, and there are some of us who are really wired to work hard, and we really need the message of it's good to rest. And then there's others who are more wired to, like, I just like to rest. It's not that they're lazy, but they just lean into rest, and sometimes at the expense of working hard. And both are considered very good in creation. Now, the fall has shifted the realities of those things, but both were very good, right?
I did share with people too, and Brant, one of the statistics I read this week was 55% of those in full-time vocational ministry say that they're not making time for their own spiritual formation because they're too busy with the work of ministry, right? And so I just wanted to make clear, like, it's not just, it's a all of us problem.
No, it's really hard to be reading your own Bible, doing your own devotions, and avoid the temptation to go, oh, people need to hear this.
Or to say, I'm too busy, I have to do these things and have these meetings. I don't have time to just spend time with Jesus.
I'm too busy studying the Bible for everybody else to spend time with Jesus for myself.
And I actually think it's a particular temptation for pastors and church ministry leaders to convince themselves that doing things for Jesus is the same as spending time with Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked a little bit about that in Cambridge on Sunday, about a period in my life where I recognized how I was so busy doing things for God, and I felt like everything I was doing were the right things to do, but I found myself with that fruit of the Spirit conversation we had earlier and going, this doesn't line up. And then I read Jesus say, you'll have rest for your souls. And I'm going, well, I don't. And so either Jesus is lying to me or I'm off the mark somewhere. And that really forced some significant introspection and asking God to search my own life to figure out what was going on and what was off.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask yourself, both when we talk about work and rest, to ask yourself the question, why do I work and why do I rest? What is it that drives that, right? I think a lot of people end up working because they overwork on sometimes really good things because they're terrified of failing, or they're terrified of not mattering, and that's why Jesus provides rest in that, right? Because he says, hey, like, what your work does not determine whether you matter. And if you're worried about failing, just know this: you're a failure, and I love you anyhow. And you can rest in that.
That's the beauty of the gospel.
That's the type of rest, when we talk about soul rest, that's the type of rest Jesus gives to us, because he helps us in the whys to recognize we're chasing after the wrong stuff, the things that only he can satisfy.
And I think in all that, there's a helpful distinction that I think it's important to drill down on, is this idea of what does actual rest look like? Because I think for many of us, the way that we've been taught about Sabbath and having a rest is merely like, you have your job, you work your 40 plus hours in your week, and then you get your weekend, you get your Saturday, and maybe your Sunday too, and then so you get 2 days off. And so rest is just anything that isn't the office. Like, as long as I'm not in the office, as long as I'm not checking my email, therefore I am resting. And I think like that, we fall into a trap there of, what does Jesus actually mean when he says, come to me and I'll give you rest? He's not saying, and I'll give you a weekend, right? Like, what is he describing here? So what do you guys think of that? Like, what's the difference between just merely having time off and actually biblically pursuing rest?
Yeah, I think there are two different things. First of all, the kind of rest Jesus is talking about is not something that I earn by any type of time off that I'm taking. It's a gift of grace that He's giving.
I will give you rest. Yeah.
Right? So I think that what Jesus is talking about there is that kind of deep soul rest that we were talking about earlier, and I can't manufacture it. Now, we'll get into this in a couple minutes, but when we start talking about what does it mean to take on the yoke of Jesus, because that creates an environment in my own heart and my life for that soul rest to kind of be given to me. I think is the best way I can, without totally unpacking the yoke of Jesus part yet.
I think I'd put it this way, and this will tie into what we're going to talk about too. It's the rest that Jesus offers is a pattern of life, not a pause from life.
Right.
Right. We often think about the weekend or a vacation or whatever as the pause from life.
Right.
Like I just have to stop it all and get to this other thing, and then this thing will provide everything I need in order to be able to go back to that other stuff that I just don't even want to face, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, well, no, Jesus says in John 10:10, I came to give you life and life in abundance. And when I was talking about it on Sunday, I said, that doesn't sound like life in abundance to me.
Yeah.
Where you're just constantly trying to escape life.
Right.
It doesn't sound like a life in abundance.
Right. No, that's exactly it. And that's on the topic of rest and what does rest look like? What does Sabbath keeping look like? There's a wide variety of thoughts around that. And, I know a number of our young adults recently went through an Equip class talking about Sabbath and what it means to keep Sabbath. And I know a number of them have radically shifted their behaviors in terms of how they approach one day a week to take a Sabbath day rest. And it's been good for them. It's really, really been helpful for them. For me, a book that was written quite a long time ago now that was very helpful was from a Canadian guy named Mark Buchanan. He wrote a book called The Rest of God, and it was very helpful. I grew up in a very legalistic church environment of the rules you had to live by to consider yourself resting. Yeah. And as long as you checked off all these things, you're now resting on Sunday. Yeah. And this book was very helpful to free me of that. Yeah. So
nothing says rest like making sure I'm checking all the boxes.
That's right. Exactly.
Keeping all the rules.
Feels like the kind of thing Jesus was speaking into on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So when since we started talking about that, when we talk about the yoke of Jesus, he brings that out in this passage. First of all, Derek broke all of our child protection policies on Sunday.
Oh, how do you do that?
We'll put a yoke on some kids.
Put a yoke on some kids just to see what would happen.
They asked for it.
They asked for it. That makes it okay.
So I had the yoke up on stage. It's actually Keith's yoke that he hangs on his wall in his office.
He doesn't have any kids hanging from it on his wall.
He does not. He does not. And they're like, can we see the yoke? Can we see the yoke? Yeah, absolutely, you can see the yoke. Is it heavy? Wouldn't it be heavy to put a yoke on? And I was like, yo, it is heavy. I said, but you need to picture an ox with a yoke on, and it's got all of its mass and strength, and it's got it weight over its four legs, and look how the yoke rests. It rests on the shoulders. So they said, well, can we try putting it on together? And I was like, okay, here we go. So they're like, yeah, that's not nearly as heavy as just trying to pick it up when it's resting on us like that. So they just wanted to see how a yoke would feel, and I guarantee you, they won't forget the Sunday they put a yoke on.
You are right. They won't. It's okay. If you want, the message to all of our kids ministry workers is, as long as the kids ask for it, you can break all the child protection policies.
Absolutely. Give them a Sunday they won't forget. That's what I heard. I just smacked my mic. Keith's going to be upset.
All right, so for those who didn't hear your message on Sunday, just how would you unpack what Jesus means by taking on the yoke of Jesus?
Yeah, one of the things that I explain on Sunday, this idea that Jesus is talking about rest. He's talking about weariness, and all of a sudden now he uses this imagery of a yoke, which is we're in our modern society, like now we're so far removed from all of that it's almost hard to understand. So glad that Derek actually physically brings out a yoke to show, and I know you had an image on the screen. I didn't do any of that, but I tried to explain this piece of wood that goes around an animal as they're working on the farm.
You didn't use the egg yolk picture?
I didn't use the egg yolk. No.
It's just that's disappointing.
That was a good yoke.
Yeah, but every other generation would have had a far better understanding of this. But so he's going from like rest, weariness, and then all of a sudden this like working imagery. And so I think that's important to address. So like it's kind of making this sharp turn. What is he getting at here? And one of the things I want to explain is that there's this exchange that's happening where Jesus is saying he's going to take our yoke upon himself. He's going to take all of our sin, our shame, the stuff that we carry, this burden on our shoulders. He takes that and he says in exchange, he'll give us his yoke. And as I said on Sunday, like as a younger Christian reading this, when he says my yoke, my burden, it is light. I always thought, okay, but it's still a burden. So it's like you got to go to church and like, be clean shaven. You got to be like this good person.
You're failing.
Saying like, I know.
You're failing on the clean shaven.
He's like, so it's and I don't know where I picked this up. I'm sure it was taught somewhere of like, it's this yoke, but it's a burden. It's light, but it's a burden. But I think that's a misunderstanding of it. He's like, no, like when he says my burden is light, he's not saying it's a light burden. It's no burden at all anymore. Now this exchange has happened, so we can receive his righteousness, his hope, and actually his rest. That's what's happening in this passage, and Jesus is using this imagery that unfortunately is a little harder for us to get at nowadays in our culture, but I think vitally important understanding how do we actually strive, or how do we actually receive this rest that he gives to us.
Okay.
I think there's a lot going on here, and part of the problem when you're dealing with image is there can be multiple ways of seeing it and understanding it. One of the ways that Jesus uses yoke elsewhere is this idea of he talks about the yoke of the Pharisees. He talks about the teachings of the Pharisees and how it burdened people down, put heavy weights on what they were unable to carry, right? Because there's a legalism and it was just piling law on them that they were never going to be able to keep.
Yeah.
And so I think Jesus, at least part of that, and because he uses it elsewhere, has to deal with that reality of I have this teaching that is not going to weigh you down, but it's going to give you the rest you're looking for.
Yeah.
I do think at the same time, he's in an agricultural culture. He knows the imagery that he's using, so I agree with your understanding. And then if you think about that as well, to come under the yoke means also that you come under the mastery of another, right? That it's very counterintuitive to us to think that in order to find rest, I have to submit.
Right.
But I think there is a call here, and this is where I got into the way of life, that there is a call here that to come under the reins of the master, to come alongside Jesus and under the reins, that's where we find rest, is by actually surrendering the efforts that I'm always trying to put in my life. And if you think about the dual yoke, you think about this. I said this, some of you are just like totally beat up and exhausted right now because you've come under the yoke and yet you keep on trying to fight the yoke that you're under. So you're fighting the reins where the master's trying to take you, and you got the big ox and you're the little ox. And you keep on trying to pull, and he's like, when are you gonna just get over yourself and start walking in the direction I'm walking? It's going to be so much easier. You're exhausting yourself for no reason.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I think there's all of this going on in this picture.
Yeah, I think you got this holistic picture, like you're saying, Derek. You got the salvation issue, and that whole thing of works righteousness and being set free from that, and which makes it a light yoke to take on. But you also have this whole way of life that Jesus is calling us into. I think I use the example that all of us are mastered by something.
Yep.
Whether we want to admit it or don't want to admit it is a different story, but there is something that is guiding our decision making and our attitudes. And what Jesus is inviting us into here is like the fullness of salvation, the forgiveness of your sins, and the fullness of those sins no longer having power over your life, and you being able to walk with him, learn his way. And as you learn his way, the yoke even becomes lighter and lighter over time, right? Because you're not fighting against it. And you're allowing him to master it. And so you're learning, as the early church called the way. You're learning to walk in the way, and not. So I think it's such an important thing, because sometimes people think of it as this theoretical idea of, okay, now that I'm a Christian, I've got the yoke. But then you see Jesus say it's an easy yoke, which for a lot of Christians doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Because they go, well, wait a minute. Like you were saying a few minutes ago, the Christian life isn't always easy, right? So what is it that makes this an easy yoke? Because I hear people all the time, preachers all the time, and we've done it.
Yeah.
Hey, like you need to sacrifice and you need to give up your life.
You got to pick up your cross and follow. I mean, that's Jesus' words.
That's Jesus' words, right? Yeah. So, and if you've been a Christian long enough, you're going to go, this doesn't feel like easy.
Yeah.
So why does Jesus use the words, it's an easy yoke, when it doesn't always feel easy?
Yeah, I think, again, easy and rest are not the same thing.
Right.
We often conflate the two. What is easiest will be what is most restful.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's any way that you can square those words with what Jesus has to teach us. When Jesus says, hey, if you're going to be my disciple, you need to count the cost of what it costs to follow me. His point is there's going to be a cost, but if you count the cost, what you're going to understand is that the benefit is far greater than the cost.
Right.
Right? So if we think about realigning our priorities with Jesus, like you're not going to be able to do that without getting rid of some things.
Right.
But in getting rid of some of those things and stepping into some new rhythms and ways of being, you're going to find that what you were trying to get out of those things, you actually will find here. Right?
Yeah, that's good. Any thoughts to add to that, Daryl?
Yeah, I think right after this, Jesus is going to start talking about the Sabbath, and this idea of rest is closely associated with that. And so I think part of it, like when we say his burden is light, the striving that we are involved with is a striving that is walking in his way versus a striving that is the legalism that the Pharisees would have put upon the people. That idea of this yoke of, hey, like it's all up to you. You got to do all of this work now. And Jesus is calling us into something, and I think Derek, you put it really well there. Of rest isn't just purely you're going to do nothing now, right? Like you're just going to sit back and just let life unfold. God is still at work. That's the thing that we're resting in, that he is at work in our lives, and now we are walking in step with him. And so, it is different than what I think in our culture, what we think of as rest, where rest is you book the vacation, you go on the cruise ship, or you go to Disney, or like whatever it is, and now there's no responsibilities. You're the captain of your own life. You get to do exactly what you want to do. Yeah. And anything that gets in the way is the opposite of rest. Anything that gets in the way of you actually receiving all these things, that isn't quite the picture that Jesus is getting at here. He's not just giving some cosmic view of vacation. There's something much deeper here that he's getting at.
Yeah, no, it's good. I think that, if you go back to the idea of being mastered, we're all mastered by some yoke. Part of what I think Jesus is getting at here is the reality that every yoke is going to lead you somewhere. Yep. And he's kind of indicating that there's an end result to the yoke that you're under right now, and anything other than his yoke is ultimately going to suck the life out of you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he's inviting you into the easy yoke because it's going to be the better yoke for you.
Yep.
So in the few minutes that we've got left, I want to kind of get practical for our listeners, if we can. I'm just thinking about the realities people are facing right now. Like, let's be honest, trade war. And I know it's delayed 30 days, but we're living in this.
So that'll just, that'll just give you 30 days to be a
little bit more
obsessed about it, to get anxious
That's
about it, right?
We're coming off of COVID. Now, a couple of years later, we're going into this another significant moment of uncertainty in the life of our country. And then on top of that, you've got people who are just going through all kinds of things, where there's already a lot of uncertainties. And they read these verses of Jesus saying, "Come to me and I'll give you rest for your soul." And frankly, they're not experiencing it.
Yep.
Everything in them is struggling and facing the realities of life. What do we say to ourselves and to any individual who finds themselves in that spot today?
One of the questions that I've been asking myself while in this passage is, he says, all you who are weary and heavy laden or burdened, carrying a bunch of burdens. One of the things I've been asking myself, are there some burdens that I just keep on insist on carrying that I don't need to carry anymore because I can give it to Jesus, right? And unless you maybe personally have a direct line to Donald Trump, you're probably not going to be able to do anything about whatever is going to happen with the trade war over the next 30. No, be wise, right? If you're worried about your employment moving forward, it's probably not the time to go book a $10,000 trip or something. Don't just pretend to feign ignorance. Be wise, but understand the things that you can't control and go to the one who you know can control them and give them to him. 1 Peter, we're told to cast all our cares upon him because he cares for us. Because there is a love that he has for us. If you have shame that you're carrying from things, it's just weighing you down. And I just think, over time, the one thing I've learned is you just pick up stuff along the way.
You do.
And you need a discipline of unloading those things onto Jesus in order to be able to experience the rest. So I'll lift up those burdens. And the good thing is that, Jesus in his promise says, I will give you rest. And the rest that he promised, there's no asterisks on it. So even if the weariness is of your own doing, if it's your own sin and your own shame, well, repent from your sin, release your shame. If it's your own decisions, maybe you've made financial decisions, right, that just have you stressed out right now. You don't have to fix it all yourself and then come to Jesus and find rest. He wants to meet you in that. So I guess that's one of the things I would say.
That's a great practical example, because think about this idea of the yoke of Jesus being the way of Jesus. And so coming to Jesus, think about finances for a second. Coming to Jesus looks a lot like starting with, hey, Jesus, I know I messed up. And I'm asking you to forgive me. So now grace is there, and God forgives you. But he doesn't just say, okay, I forgive you. Now Jesus says, I want to invite you into my way. And so that's where you can learn the way of Jesus in terms of finances. And allow Jesus to shape the decisions you make going forward from this day on into the finances. And it's why we do things like the Cap Money course here at the church, just to help you learn some practical things of the way of Jesus in handling your finances. So that's really good. Daryl, any thoughts, advice you would give to someone who's kind of feeling it right now, and their reality doesn't line up with this rest that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 11?
I find it fascinating in this passage. He, in verse 29, says, "Take up my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart." And what Jesus is doing there, he's rooting this rest in who he is. He describes himself as lowly and humble in heart. which is not a very impressive image that Jesus gives at first glance. Like, I want to read it, learn from me because I'm victorious, I'm strong, I can take on any trade war. We live in a world that highly values power and strength. And what Jesus is saying here is, hey, for all of you who are weary and burdened, follow me because I am not weary or burdened. He's actually given an image of rest, because you can be strong, powerful, but you actually be incredibly insecure in your own being.
Yeah.
But what Jesus is saying here is like, hey, like this is who I am. I'm humble. I am not worried. My heart is at peace, and because of that, I can give you peace. And so I think a part of us seeking after this rest is actually just knowing who Christ is. Spend time with him. This is why we worship, why we study his word, is because we need to know who Christ is. We need to be in this close relationship with him, and then we can begin to receive his rest. This is why I think the vacation doesn't ultimately work if it's a vacation that is completely devoid of anything that is Christ. But if you're going to say, hey, I'm going to Sabbath and truly Sabbath and actually spend time with Christ, I'm going to spend time with God, I think you're going to walk away from that time, whether it's 24 hours or 24 minutes with him, it's going to lead to far greater rest. And so I think that's the place where we really need to start off with, is, do we actually know who Christ is? Have we actually received his rest in knowing his character and what he's come to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because when you know the character of Christ, it will free your mind from the worries of the rest of the world. Like you talked about having a direct line to Donald Trump.
Yep.
But honestly, we have a direct line to God because of what Jesus has done for us. And that's better than the direct line to the president. And I said on Sunday, told everyone, look, when God says cast all your cares on him because he cares for you, he means it. And there are lots of times where practically I'll pray prayers that will literally go like this: God, this is your problem. I can't deal with this. I don't know what the answer is to this, and I need to make this your problem instead of my problem. Now, that doesn't change the reality that I have to live with that issue. But it does, that kind of surrender is the kind of thing that brings that rest to your soul.
That's right.
Yeah, right? A great book that gets really into this is Gentle and Lowly. Dane Ortland came out a couple years ago, and he just spends the entire book actually just looking at this half a verse and just explaining, what does this look like? How do we spend time with God? Incredibly powerful writing that he gives. And so for any of our readers out there, I just want to commend that book to them as well.
Yeah, it's a great book.
I do think like a big part of the problem in our culture, and it includes those of us in the church, is our calendars, right? Like, I would just, if I was going to speak directly to parents, stop over-programming your kids. And over-programming your family and over-programming your life, and allow Jesus to determine your calendar, not what all of their friends are doing, not what the TikTok says you ought to be as a parent. Like, allow Jesus to be the one who is helping to determine and fill out the calendar for your family, and not just for your own personal life, but for the life of your family.
Absolutely. And that's, like, when Jesus talks about taking up his yoke, that's another practical example. It's this, really allow Jesus to be in control of every single part of your life, including your calendar, because those decisions will shape the kind of stresses that you feel week in and week out as a family.
Well, I think to speak into that, though, I think there's the other danger, though, of saying, okay, I've over-programmed it, so I'm just going to put on Saturday rest, and then it's just open, and there's nothing in there, and so you show up on Saturday, you're like, all right, I'm resting. I don't know what this means, but I'm actually have a plan of what does rest actually supposed to look like, especially in your family. I heard someone put it this way, that we often speak with just words, we communicate with words, but we think in pictures. So with your spouse, sit down and come up with a picture of what does actually biblically resting look like this Saturday? What will this look like? And I think there you can actually begin to move in that direction of walking in the way of Christ versus just having an empty space. Now, empty space is helpful. I'm not saying like that's wrong, but what ends up happening is we just fill it with
Netflix.
More Netflix, more video games, more farmer's market. Like those things are okay, but is that really what you're getting at when you say, hey, I want to rest biblically, I want to receive what Christ is getting at here? And that's where having that game plan, I think, is wonderful. And the game plan might be simply, hey, in Saturday morning, we're just going to go for a walk and just talk about what God's doing in our lives. But it's not like overly planned, but it is like, hey, we're going to do something. We're going to make sure we're actually walking in this direction together.
I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that we put in our calendar as a family always that I will not regret in having in my calendar as my kids were young was as many family meal times together as we could. Like, and if we had not put those in the calendar, we would have run every single different direction. But I am now with my kids now all in high school and above, man, I am glad that we set those times to say, no, as a family, we're all stopping. Phones are all away. Thank you, Amanda. Phones are all away. TV is off. We are at the table together, and a lot of them, nothing significant maybe happened in the moment, but it was the practice of being together.
And it was just the long-term gains that you get from doing things like that. Wholeheartedly agree. Like those are huge, very practical things. I just had a conversation today actually with Rachel, and we're going to have an Equip class later in the spring talking about these kinds of family rhythms that are walking in the way of Jesus, and how do we build these rhythms into our lives as a family. So keep an eye out for that. Guys, this has been really good. Really appreciate your perspective as we walked through this journey. And to you as a church, we just want you to know, like, if you're feeling up against it right now and you're going through it, we are here to support you in any way that we can. Please feel free to reach out to any of us. It would be a privilege for us just to walk with you and pray with you and give you any perspectives that we can on this passage. But more important than us, I hope that you hear just the words of Jesus. He really meant it when he said, "Come to me." And he really meant it when he said, "I will give you rest." It's a promise from him to you as you take on his yoke. And so think about that and meditate on that over the course of this week. God bless you, church. We love you, and we'll see you next time.